There's a particular kind of adult, isn't there? The one who seems totally confident on the surface, maybe even highly capable or fiercely independent. But if you look closer, there's a quietness to them, a kind of deep-seated uncertainty that runs underneath almost everything they do. You know this person, or maybe you are this person. It means nobody was there to teach you how to handle complex emotions. Nobody showed you how to navigate relationships healthily. Nobody explained how the world actually works. So, you learned through relentless trial and error, through failure, through watching everyone else seem to know something fundamental that you just didn't get. They learned to figure things out instantly because asking for help meant admitting they didn't know. And admitting they didn't know felt dangerous. It felt like vulnerability, and vulnerability felt threatening. They certainly don't burden people with their struggles. Growing up without that foundational framework creates specific wounds, not dramatic. Messy ones, usually, but quiet, pervasive ones. Wounds that show up in unexpected places. This person might be brilliant at their job, but terrible at relationships. They might be expert problem solvers in the external world, but completely lost when it comes to understanding their own emotions. They seem confident and put together, but they secretly feel like a fraud. They live with the constant tension that any moment now, someone's going to realize they don't actually know what they are doing. Because guidance isn't just about teaching skills. It's about providing a basic structure for thinking and understanding the world. It's about showing someone what's normal and what's not. When you grow up without that, you don't have a foundation. You're building everything from scratch, and sometimes you're building on sand. This is why they often struggle with decision-making. It's not that they're indecisive, it's that they lack a clear internal reference point. They don't know what they should do, so they often do what they think they should do, trying to fit into a mold that was never properly explained to them. They make choices based on what they think is expected, rather than what they actually want. And then they wonder why nothing ever feels quite right or authentic. There's also a specific kind of loneliness that comes with this. Other people seem to have this existing network, people they can call, people who know them deeply, who've watched them grow up, who care about them regardless of their performance. But if you grew up without that guidance, you often feel like an outsider, watching everyone else participate in something you simply don't understand. This plays out painfully in relationships. They might attract people who need fixing because fixing others feels familiar. They might struggle to believe that anyone could care about them without expecting something substantial in return. And they might push people away right when things get close, because closeness feels too dangerous. There's also a hypervigilance that sets in, a constant scanning for danger. What are the unspoken rules here? What is expected of me? Who might hurt me? They get to be whoever they think they need to be in that moment. But they don't quite get to be themselves because they're not entirely sure who that is. People who grew up without guidance often carry a kind of deep shame about it, like they should have figured it out years ago. They look at others who seem so capable and think, why don't I know this? Why am I still confused? Why do I still feel like I'm faking it? The brutal reality is that not having guidance at a critical stage actually changes the way your brain is wired. You don't learn to self-soothe the way kids who are guided learn to. You don't develop the same sense of fundamental security. Instead, you internalize the feeling that you are utterly on your own, that you have to handle everything yourself, that the world is something you have to survive, rather than something you get to live in. This shows up in how they handle stress. They don't fall apart dramatically. They just quietly struggle. They internalize everything. They keep functioning. They show up. They do the work. But inside, there's this running tension, this constant, low-level anxiety, this feeling that at any moment, something could go wrong, and they wouldn't have the internal resources to handle it. If this description resonated with you, know this: you are not broken. You are a survivor. And understanding the blueprint you built your life on is the first step toward finally building the strong foundation you deserve. The thing about people who grew up without guidance is that they are often intensely intelligent. They become their own teachers, their own guides. But this reliance on self-guidance has a specific drawback. They are relying entirely on their own limited perspective. They don't have someone to check their logic against, no one to tell them they might be wrong, or to offer a completely different viewpoint. They can accept situations that are totally unacceptable because they lack a reference point for what acceptable looks like. They might stay in harmful relationships because they don't know what healthy connection feels like. And they often don't realize any of this until much, much later, if at all. Here's where we need to look at what actually creates this situation. Growing up without guidance doesn't happen in a vacuum. It comes from a circumstance. Some people who grew up this way had parents so overwhelmed by their own lives, dealing with addiction, mental illness, financial crisis, or deep unresolved trauma, that there was zero room for the child's emotional development. Others had parents who believed in rugged independence from an impossibly young age. They were the parents who never asked about your day, who didn't help you process hard feelings or sit with you when things were painful. They were there, but not truly present. And finally, some had parents hyper-focused on their own image. Parents who cared more about how things looked to the outside world than how things actually were inside the home. They taught their children to maintain a perfect facade. A child grows up with a deeply ingrained lesson that they can't rely on anyone but themselves. That asking for help is weakness. That struggling in silence is strength. That figuring it out alone is what's expected. That not knowing something is somehow shameful. And this child becomes an adult who is carrying all of that weight. An adult who has learned incredibly well how to survive. But here is the truth we need to face. Survival is not the same as thriving. Surviving is just existing without completely falling apart. Thriving is something else entirely. The brutal reality is that people who grew up without guidance often spend their entire adulthood desperately trying to get the instruction they missed out on. Sometimes they seek it from partners, expecting those partners to teach them how to function. Sometimes they seek it from therapists, spending years unpacking things that should have been explained when they were young. They seek it in books, from mentors, from anyone who seems to have the answers they are desperately looking for. And sometimes they never find it. They just keep functioning, keep surviving, keep pretending they know what they are doing. They keep adjusting, adapting, and performing. And they never quite reach a place where they feel safe enough to simply just be. But here is the most important thing to understand. This is not a life sentence. This is not something that defines you forever. Growing up without guidance created specific patterns, specific wounds, and a particular way of moving through the world. But patterns can change. Wounds can heal. And the way you learn to move through the world can absolutely be reimagined. It requires becoming your own conscious guide. It requires looking back at what you learned then, perhaps more importantly, what you did and learned then, deciding what you actually want to believe about yourself and the world today. It requires getting honest about the ways you are still operating from a place of chronic survival rather than security. It requires finding people who can offer what was missing, not to replace what should have been there, because you can't go back, but to help you build what you need right now. And most of all, it requires real self-compassion. Not the kind where you just tell yourself you are fine, but the kind where you recognize that you were a kid doing your very best with no instruction manual. The fact that you figured out so much with absolutely zero guidance. The fact that you are still standing, still functioning, still trying, that is genuinely remarkable. That is strength. You're not broken because you grew up without guidance. You are resourceful. You are resilient. You are capable. But you are also tired. And it's time to stop carrying all of this alone. It's time to get the guidance you needed then, to learn what you missed, to build a foundation that is truly stable, to discover what you actually want for yourself instead of just what you think you should want. Understanding these patterns, recognizing exactly where they came from. That's what we do here at The Forgotten Self. We look at the subtle, invisible lessons we learned and the things we missed that we are still trying to figure out. If this helped you see something about yourself, if you felt even a little less alone in this struggle, please subscribe. Until next time, be gentle with yourself.